A very good morning to all the participants today. My name is Jaime Mayaki. I'm the Deputy Director of the Regional Department for Africa at UNWTO. And I would like to thank you all, from the Africa continent for your presence here today and your high level of interest in the second session of the UNWTO Workshop on Tourism Statistics and Mobile Positioning Data. As you know, this workshop is organized with our valued UNWTO affiliate member, Positium, who is a leading company in analytics from mobile positioning data, as well as the International Communication Union, ITU, who's our sister United Nations specialized agency for information and communication technologies. And we're also accompanied by a global voice group, which collects big data from sectors including telecoms and financial services and turns it into actionable information. So today, Positium will be represented by Mr. Siim Esko, who is the head of sales, ITU by Ms. Esperanza Magpantay, who's a senior statistician and a big data project lead at ITU, and Global Voice Group will be represented by Mr. Laurent Sarr, who's its technical director. And we also have the opportunity to be accompanied today by Ms. Carolyne Kakemu, who's a statistician at the Communications Authority of Kenya. So we have already mentioned in a previous session the importance of having data, which is independent, impartial, and transparent. I mean, data that is methodologically sound and elaborated with scientific principles for effective decision making. And as you know, at UNWTO, our role is to collect, analyze, publish, and standardize in order to improve tourism statistics and to promote the integration of these statistics within the sphere of the United Nations system. And as part of the UNWTO agenda for Africa and our priority on strengthening statistics systems, we have prepared this second workshop on tourism statistics and mobile positioning data for member states of our region, the Africa region, as this is an essential component to the measurement and restart of the sector. So during the first webinar, we talked about improving the level of tourism statistics with data from telecommunications network, and we looked at case studies where mobile positioning data work for tourism statistics. So today, in the second session, we will look actually at the access, the processing methods and benefits for government institutions to use mobile positioning data. So we will start by looking at the role of telecommunications regulators and other stakeholders in data access. So this will be covered by ITU. And we will follow this will be followed by data protection and ownership in the case of government institutions. And this will be presented by Laurent Sarr from Global Voice Group. And eventually, we will dive in the data processing method and standards with Positium by looking at the main outputs and benefits of mobile positioning data for governments. And we will finish with a country example, of Kenya. And this will be presented by Ms. Carolyne Kakemu, who's the statistician at Communications Authority of Kenya. Just before we start, just wanted to highlight that if there are any questions that you want to log in during the session, please feel free to use the chat box. We'll collect the questions and try to respond as we go along during our session, and also we will have also a little debate time to discuss and respond to your questions. So with no further ado, I would like to thank in advance all the speakers and participants for their attention. And I would like to pass the floor to Ms. Esperanza Magpantay, who's the Senior Statistician of the ICT Data and Analytics Division of the International Communication Union and the lead of the Mobile Positioning Data Task Team at the UN Committee of Experts on Big Data in Official Statistics. So Esperanza, I give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jaime. Good morning, everyone. So today I will be sharing with you the experience that we have in using mobile phone data in ITU. Just to check, are you seeing my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, let me just see if you can see my presentation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
I'll put it in presentation mode. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the ITU mobile phone big data project to illustrate the role of the different stakeholders in accessing the data coming from the telecommunication network operators, particularly the mobile network operators. And so the work that we did in ITU is part of the regular work on statistics. As you may know, we are the agency who is responsible for the collection and dissemination of ICT and telecommunication statistics. So I will cover 5 main areas. So to give you an overview of the work that we did in this mobile phone big data pilot. I'm going to also highlight the stages of the implementation, how we process the data in terms of the models that we use, and the different roles of the different stakeholders, and what are the key takeaways that we learned from this project. So the ITU implemented the pilot project on the use of mobile phone big data. We started in 2016 and we finished in 2018. This is the first pilot. And we also have a second pilot that started in 2020 and we concluded last year. So traditionally, we collect data from national statistical offices, mainly on the use of communication and internet using household survey vehicles. So these data are collected by national statistical offices. And the indicators that we collect here are mainly used by policymakers to assess, for example, how much of the population are using the internet or how much of the population is using mobile phone. There are other indicators that are collected through household surveys, but as you may know, household surveys are quite expensive to implement, and therefore there's a lot of gap in the data that we collect from household surveys. We also collect data coming from administrative data sources, and these sources are the ones that are collected by telecom network operators, mainly directly from the network operators, mobile operators, and internet service providers. So for example, the number of mobile cellular subscriptions or the number of fixed broadband subscriptions are the examples of the indicators that we collect from the regulators. These data are aggregated data at the country level, so we only get a value for a particular indicator without knowing how much of these indicators belong to an operator or not. So it's only at the country level. So using these 2 data sources, we've found out that there's still a lot of data gaps in our data collection. And so therefore, we want to expand our work on the use of big data, mainly coming from mobile operators, to see how we can complement or supplement existing indicators and data availability for the ones that we collect using these 2 methods. At the same time, we want to see how mobile phone big data could be used to derive new sets of indicators. So the first pilot, we covered 6 countries. We tried to look at the experiences from each of the ITU regions. So we have Colombia for Latin America, Georgia for the CIS, Kenya for Africa, Philippines for Asia and Pacific, Sweden for Europe, UAE for the Arab states. So these are the ITU regions. And in this first pilot, we look at 16 indicators. And these indicators are mainly those that were collected using our traditional administrative data sources. The second pilot that we did was in 2020. And here we were very focused on looking at 2 SDG ICT indicators, one of which is the one that are collected from administrative data. So how much of the population is covered by mobile cellular network broken down by technology. And then the second one, SDG indicator as well, is the percentage of population using the internet. And this is an indicator that is collected from household survey. And I would like to point out here that since this is a household survey indicator, I would say still 30% of countries around the world are still not collecting this data, even one time. So there's really no information. And so what we do usually is to estimate it based on administrative sources. So in this exercise, what we want to find out is whether mobile phone big data could be used to calculate this indicator. And in so doing these two pilots, we found three main challenges. One is the lack of skills to use big data in the different agencies that we work with. There's also the second main challenge, and I would say this is really the biggest of them all, which is data access. And third is the lack of infrastructure. So the first one, the skills and the lack of infrastructure are, I would say, the easy ones to handle, because it's just a matter of putting resources coming from the different stakeholders. The data access are the ones that is the one that really took a lot of time when implementing this project. So in implementing this project, we followed these different stages. The first one, of course, is the most important, because we want all stakeholders to know what is the objective of the project. And so we brought them together around the table, inviting the National Statistics Office, the Telecom Ministry, the regulator, if there's a separate regulator, the data providers, so these are the mobile operators in the country, and other partners such as the Data Protection Agency. And around this kickoff meeting with all the stakeholders, what we wanted to know is whether they're interested in joining, and of course to get their commitment in helping us implement this project. I would say around these different countries that we work with, everybody said yes during the kickoff meeting, that they want to be part of the project and they're willing to share the data. The third part is accessing the data, and this is where the challenge is. That's why I put it in red. Even though the different stakeholders, in particular the operators, said yes, we would like to join the project and we are willing to share our data. When it's time to share the data, there were a lot of discussions and a lot of documents that we needed to handle, particularly with regards to the legal aspect as well as the technical aspect. And so here we work a lot with the legal departments of the telecom operators and the data scientists that work with us in the implementation of these projects. I would like to mention here that these two projects, these two pilots, were implemented in partnership with Positium, who help us in every step of the implementation of the project until the dissemination of the final results. And the next one is on the processing of the data, analyzing the results of the data and the final report. So the last three steps, I would say, is not as cumbersome as accessing the data from the service providers. So there are two processing models that we took when implementing the project. The first one, and these two options, I would say, is still the ones that are being implemented in the different pilots that we've known for. The first option is where the different mobile operators calculates the indicators that we require. So we provide them the methodology, and it's the mobile operators that calculates the data in their premises. So the raw data, which we call tier 1 indicators, are aggregated into tier 2 indicators. And once these tier 2 indicators are calculated, they were transported or sent to the regulator, the ministry, or the National Statistics Office for calculation and combination into a resulting indicator. Step 2, option 2 is where the mobile operators share the data, the raw data, so the tier 1 data, to the regulator or to the National Statistics Office. And it's either the regulator or the National Statistics Office that combines the indicator into tier 2 indicators and the resulting tier 3 indicator. So both these options were explored by the different countries. And these two options is dependent on the agreed access to the data that were discussed with the telecom operators. There are pros and cons in these two options, and I think our colleague Siim will discuss them in detail, so I'm not going to put a lot of emphasis in this presentation. What I want to emphasize here is the different stakeholders that I mentioned earlier, the telecom regulator and the ministry, which is in a way usually the ones that request us to work on this project in the beginning, because they know that the data from mobile operators are available, because they they have the experience to request the data from them regularly for monitoring purposes of their license conditions to know whether they're really implementing the conditions that are outlined in their license agreements. They also have the capacity to invest on equipments and expertise to store and process the data. And I think our colleague Laurent will discuss this in more detail later on. There's also the frequent interaction of telecom regulators, particularly with the mobile operators in their regulatory work. And they are also in a position to negotiate and mediate on the data access to mobile phone data. So the regulator has direct relationship with the mobile network operators. And in almost all the countries that we work with, without the intervention of the telecom regulator, the operators are not necessarily willing to share the data when we discuss them for the purpose of this project. The National Statistics Office is, of course, a very important partner in this exercise. This is because of the need for the National Statistical Office to produce statistics that they need to comply with the monitoring of the Sustainable Development Goals monitoring indicators. And so for them, the use of mobile phone data in particular is indeed one of the first options when looking at the use of big data. But at the same time, the Statistical Office has the Statistical Act that guides them and in the implementation of whatever data collection they do. So they are guided by Statistical Act to use whatever data sources there are in the country to provide the information that are required for policy making. They're also mandated to produce statistics, official statistics, and they ensure the confidentiality of individuals' information because it's included in the statistical law or in the Statistical Act. And of course, they have the necessary skills to analyze statistical data and information. So even though in statistical offices, they don't have the data scientists, but they have a pool of people that can be combined to analyze the data that are coming from either surveys or new data sources. Of course, the mobile operators are the main I would say stakeholder in this exercise because they are the custodian of the mobile phone data. They are the one who invests in equipments and expertise to store and process these records. And this is mainly for their business purposes to know how the business is growing and to focus on areas where they're lagging behind. And they have the necessary big data skills to analyze the data that they compile for their business purposes. So the fourth agency is the Data Protection Agency, and they provide, in this context, they provide guidance and oversight for the lawful use of the data coming from mobile phone operators in particular, and in the processing of this data. They also ensures the safeguards are in place to produce and the data that are needed from mobile phone operators, and of course to ensure privacy. So in the exercise that we did, it was mainly not just the mobile operators, legal departments that requires the data scientists, the ITU, and the other stakeholders to sign a memorandum of understanding and non-disclosure agreements, but it's also the Data Protection Agency that requires that these documents be signed before mobile phone big data could be analyzed. So more details on these different roles of stakeholders are available in the link that I provided below. It is a handbook that was produced with the UN Statistics Division and this chapter on data access, which were elaborated in the handbook was inputted or prepared by the ITU. So I invite you all to check this handbook. And lastly, this is the key takeaway that I would like to share with you. In implementing the project that we did both in the first pilot and in the second pilot, it is very important that all the administrative documents and all the legal procedures to access the data before the project start is in place. And this all depends on how the data will be accessed by the NSO and how the data could be shared by the mobile operators. There's also a grid method for the data transfer. Sorry. And this will also impact the data access and agreements. It's also very important to define the methodology in terms of how the data could be calculated. What are the resulting indicators that you want in this exercise? I mentioned the data scientists, the skills that's necessary to implement the project, as well as the infrastructure that's needed to implement this project. And lastly, the coordination with all the stakeholders. And this is paramount in the access to the data, in the validation of results, and in the analysis of the data that's coming from mobile phone big data. So with that, I would like to thank you and leave you with these resources that you can check after this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Esperanza, for this extremely interesting presentation. We've been able to see the different challenges and the potential solutions also that need to be taken into account when diving into that type of exercise, and also the different stakeholders and the issues at stake, within each stakeholder. I mean, there's a lot of groundwork that needs to be taken into account before embarking on this, and it's interesting to see it firsthand, from the different pilot projects that you've embarked on. Right now, we'll move to another presentation. This will be on data protection, ownership, and access in the case of government institutions, and this will be done by Mr. Laurent Sarr, who's the technical director at Global Voice Group. Sorry, and Laurent, I give you the floor to give us your insight on the topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaime, and thank you, Esperanza, for your brilliant presentation. It's a pleasure for us, Global Voice, to be in this series of webinar to share our experience when it comes to mobile data. In the first webinar in April, we went over the potential of mobile positioning data and the benefits for the government institutions to access to mobile positioning data. So in this second webinar, we will be going over the data access. I think Esperanza mentioned it. Is very important because data access is a challenge when it comes to big data. So we will be going over the data access, how government institutions can have access to mobile data, and also the ownership of the data, because once you access to the data, who is the owner of the data? So I think that is important. And then the data protection, which is key when it comes to trust. And Esperanza mentioned the different stakeholders, and between the different stakeholders, I think trust is really important, and that is done with the data protection. So we will be going over the three aspects, but there is a key aspect. There are three key aspects for that, for data access, for ownership, and data protection. The first one being the role of regulation. Regulation is key to access the data. The second one being the relevance of the data ownership. Who is the owner of the data? Is it the government? Is it the technical partner of the government assisting the government to collect the big data? So it's important to know who is the owner of this data. And then once the data is in place, Esperanza mentioned it, data protection is key. So the government or the authorities need to put in place the right framework when it comes to data protection. So I'm going to share my screen and go over the presentation. So as I said earlier, today we will be still talking about mobile positioning, but how to access to the data and the data sovereignty or the ownership of the data, which is key, and the protection. And the three key pillars of to ensure the data access, the data sovereignty, and the data protection are regulation first, which is key, the data ownership, and the framework. So let's start with the first pillar, which is the regulation, because without proper regulation, the different stakeholders won't accept to share the data. So the regulation needs to be put in place for the data management, for the data acquisition, for the data processing, and for the data analysis. So regulation is key. And we know that when it comes to mobile positioning, the MNOs, even in their licensing contract, there is a need for them, there is a requirement for them to share with the authorities the data, to give access to the authorities. But even with that, there is a need of regulation because it's in their contract of license. But if the regulation is not in place, they won't accept to share the data because they need to protect the end users, they need to protect their subscribers. So a proper framework, a proper regulation needs to be in place for this collaboration between the authorities and the MNOs. So how to put in place this, this regulation, and which entity should be in charge of implementing the regulation? It depends. It depends on the jurisdiction. It depends on the law of the countries. But we can say that there are two main stakeholders when it comes to regulation. We can name the telecom regulator. We can name the ICT, the Ministry of ICT as well. So all depends on the Telecom Act of the country, because in some countries, the Telecom Act entitles the telecom regulator to approve the regulation when it comes to data access for the authorities. But if it is not the case, it will be for the ministry to validate and approve the regulation. But these two entities are key when it comes to data access, and we can see them as technical entity of the government, just to provide the other entities like the statistic board, like the national security, like the other entities, government entities, the Ministry of Finance, the Revenue Authority for the visibility over the revenue in the industry. So these two stakeholders are key when it comes to accessing the data and when it comes to putting in place the regulation. And we can see some example because as mentioned by Jaime, at Global Voice Group, what we do is the collection of big data for government, the collection of actionable data for government, just for effective decision making. And we already put in place such type of project where we collect data from the mobile operators in more than 15 countries in Africa. And today I will just share the example of two countries, Zimbabwe, where we recently implemented a platform to acquire data from the different mobile operators. And for Zimbabwe, what happened is, since the telecom regulator, which is POTRAS, was not entitled to approve the regulation was put in place by the Ministry of Information, the Ministry of ICT. And for Tanzania, it was something different because the regulation was put together by the regulator. And at some point, the regulator even invited the MNOs to participate on drafting the regulation. So it depends on the country. It depends on the jurisdiction and the different law in place. So here we have two examples. I can share other example, but here we can see one example where the regulation is from the Ministry of ICT, and another one where the regulation to access to mobile positioning data is from the telecom regulator. So once we access the data, there is something key, the ownership of the data, because data sovereignty is a geopolitical issue for African states. So it's very important to clarify this, who owns the data? So this is really important, even before acquiring the data, because even the MNOs, before sharing the data, they want to know who owns the data. where the data will be sitting, on the cloud, in country. So it's important for them because they have a contract with the end users, they have a contract with the subscribers, and their role is to protect as well the subscribers. We know the role of the telecom regulator, the role of the government, the Minister of ICT is also to protect the ecosystem and to protect the different stakeholders and to protect the end users. But for the telecom operators, the MNOs, the telcos, it's really important to know who is the owner of this data and how this data will be processed. So for this question, who owns the data? I think is quite clear. The data is owned by the government. The data is owned by the authorities, and the data must stay in country. The data must be processed in country, and that will just provide trust in the ecosystem. If all stakeholders know that the data will stay in country, the data is the government or the authorities are in control of the data, and they are putting the right framework to protect the data, I think that will create trust, and we will have less resistance when it comes to sharing the data, and which is key because as mentioned by Esperanza in the past project, the main challenge was the access to the data. So having this environment of trust will just reduce the resistance of the different stakeholders. Another key pillar, the third one, after the data deregulation, after the data ownership, is the protection of the data, which will also provide trust. And actually, only 52% of African countries have data protection legislation in force. So meaning that there are still some countries lagging in Africa, not having data protection act or data protection law. And this is really important when it comes to, as I said earlier, the trust, when it comes to data sharing. The protection is important just for the end users to be confident, just for the MNOs to be confident sharing the information. And we mentioned it in the last webinar. This data, even though we collect it from the source, we anonymize the data, which is really important. And actually, we have two examples of countries having Data Protection Act. We have Ghana. Last time we talked about Ghana in our last webinar, because in Ghana we implemented a platform together with Positium, a platform to control the spread of the coronavirus using mobile positioning data. And to put in place that project, we were in line with the Data Protection Act 843, which say all who process personal data must take into consideration the right of that individual to the privacy of his or her communication. So this is key, and is one of the key point of the Data Protection Act of Ghana, which was published in 2012. And recently, Rwanda just published a Data Protection Act just to promote the development through ICT and through data. So we have other examples where countries are putting in place Data Protection Act just to have the right framework to access to mobile positioning data. But there is here something, because each country is having its own Data Protection Act, while in Europe, we are talking about the Gdpr, where there is a law, harmonized law for data protection. So in Africa, there is an initiative from the Smart Africa Alliance, and we are part at Global Voice Group, we are part of Smart Africa Alliance, and we are part of the work group, because there is a work group led by Senegal, and the Ministry of ICT of almost all African countries are part of this initiative. And the idea is to harmonize the data protection law of Africa and have our own African GDPR, which is key when it comes to collaboration, which is key when it comes to data sharing. And with this in place, African countries can collaborate and share data tourism data, statistic on risk management, statistic on a pandemic or other type of activity that can be insightful and can boost the development of Africa. So first is regulation. Second is the ownership of the data. And third is protection. Once we have the three in place, once we collect the data, now the next step must be the processing of the data, the analysis of the data. And with that, we can see the benefits of mobile positioning. And I will be handing over to my colleague, Siim, to take you over that part of processing and analysis of mobile positioning and the benefits the government can get from this actionable data of mobile positioning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laurent. I think this was an excellent presentation. I think it gave us some really good insights on the necessary legal frameworks that need to be put in place in order to for MNOs to be comfortable, and as you mentioned, I mean, create less resistance in sharing data. Now we're going to diving into the Q&A session discussion. I don't know if there's questions already aligned in the chat box, but one I would have just Laurent, based on your presentation, the data that you shared, I mean, that only 52% of African countries have actually a legal framework in place when it comes to data protection. And the example of Tanzania that showed that actually the government engaged with the MNOs, to draft the law. So in terms of ownership, I think this maybe it's an interesting exercise to create less resistance, as you mentioned, to share the data. Do you believe this will be, I mean, for the remaining countries that maybe don't have this legal framework in place, this collaboration, this now we're talking really concretely on public-private partnership. Do you think this will be a good approach to follow on? Thank you.
My experience, I would say, is the best experience, because what happened is when we face resistance to get access to the data, that resistance comes from the MNOs. So if you involve them from scratch, if you involve them in the regulation, they will be part of it. They will feel themselves part of the regulation. So there is no reason to just create resistance or block access to the government. So by experience is the best thing to do, because sometimes if they are not associated in drafting the regulation and the terms of the regulation, they can challenge the regulation. So if we put them around the table after having the first draft, sitting with them, having their inputs, adding their inputs, when the government or the authorities release the regulation, the implementation will be smooth and access to data will be smooth. So by experience, I would say that's the right approach, involving all stakeholders from scratch and having their inputs to the regulation.
Thank you, Laurent. Sarah, I don't know if we have any hands raised from our participants.
There is one hand raised, but I believe that it might be a mistake. I will check. Solange, do you have a question?
But Esperanza has also her hand raised.
Yes.
Okay, Esperanza, I give you the floor.
Thank you. I just want to maybe answer the question that was put in the Q&A option, so that others who were not following that part can also learn what I posted there. So there was a question on what are the legal instruments that needs to be in place when accessing the data. And so what I answered there is, from our experience, there are two main documents that needs to be signed. The first one is the Memorandum of Understanding, and this is an important document because this is where the different stakeholders are laid out in a piece of document that is something that could be referred to afterwards. And in there, the name of the different stakeholders and the focal point and their roles are clearly outlined. And so what are the expectations from each of the agencies during the implementation of the project. And then there's a second document, which is the non-disclosure agreement. And this is a document that is usually signed between the mobile network operators and the data scientists who will be working on the data. So this outlines, for example, the non-sharing of the data or the different experiences that they will encounter when they are working with the data inside the premises of the mobile network operators. So those are the two important documents. In one of the cases that we have in the first pilot, the Data Protection Agency required the different stakeholders to also sign another document. And this is to make sure that the privacy and of the different individuals that are, of course, contained in the mobile network data providers are respected. And at that point, this Data Protection Agency was put on its first year. So there was a lot of learnings there. And that took also a lot of time in ensuring that the document was signed where all the stakeholders could agree with the different clauses included in that document. So I just want to share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Esperanza. Let me see if we have additional questions in the chat or any hands raised. In the meantime, maybe I will have a question for you, Esperanza. Something you clearly identify as a challenge is maybe the lack of skills, to use big data. I know your presentation when it comes to the telecom regulators, when it comes to the statistical offices, and also the mobile phone operators, there is a need to have data scientists in place, so building that capacity, how, what approach and what would you recommend to build an adequate capacity, for these stakeholders to have, these data scientists, which are necessary to analyze the data and understand it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So that is indeed one of the challenges that we face in the implementation of this project, and that was in 2016, 2017. And at that time, it was really the beginning of this work. And so in many national statistical office, the data scientist as a person does not exist, but they have other talents. They have, for example, people that knows how to process the data using R. There are people who knows how to do data visualization. There are people who knows how to do programming, but they are not necessarily geared into using the big data. So it was really a big challenge at that time. And so the only option for most of the national statistical offices is to hire people who have the data scientist features or capacities. But more and more, the national statistical offices and the regulators have hired people who have these talents, because a lot of graduates or a lot of trainings or even online materials, online courses allows them to program, for example, in Python, or to program in R, or to learn tools that are necessary for data visualization. So I would say it's less of an issue now in many national statistical offices. I'm not talking about in Africa, because maybe this is still an issue in Africa. But there's a lot of also ongoing work at the international level, but in particular, the UN Committee of Experts on Big Data and Data Science for Official Statistics, where trainings were identified that could help national statistical offices to improve skills that are necessary to use big data. This does not exclude the possibility of still having a data scientist, an external data scientist to help them initiate the project, but more and more the skills are being integrated in national statistical offices, given the amount of time that happened between then and now. And so I think in the future, this will not be necessarily an issue when people are more used to having access to the data. Of course, the mobile operators data is indeed a big data, and that is, of course, one of the limitations in national statistical offices. And infrastructure, I mentioned, is a big issue because you don't necessarily store a data set, that big data set, in a national statistical office premises. And so I think Siim will highlight other available tools that could be used to mitigate that challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Esperanza. I think if we don't have any questions right now, we will move to our break. Technically, we'll have a small break, a 10-minute break. So if you all agree, we have, I think we have a question here. Maybe this is a question that can be addressed by Laurent. 52% is a small percentage of information protection in African countries. Can we adopt the mobile positioning data method? I'm trying, Laurent, I don't know if you want to address that question. I'm not sure if it's asking about the regulatory framework, if it can be adopted at the country level, or now the question of the mobile position data on the method itself.
Yeah. So there are two things here. One is deregulation, giving access to the data, and the other one is the data protection. I think when it comes to mobile positioning data and method, the first aspect, the most important, is the deregulation, because the regulation will even set the tone for the data protection and even other aspects. So that is the real framework. So that needs to be in place. And in almost all countries where authorities have access to the data, it is in place. The 52% we are talking about here is the Data Protection Act, meaning that only 52% of African countries actually have Data Protection Act or Data Protection Framework. And this is going to change because Smart Africa, which is promoting the collaboration between African countries when it comes to ICT, and also promoting the development of Africa through ICT, is actually pushing to put in place African Gdpr. So with that, we will soon see this 52% increase and go up, because almost all African countries are a member of Smart Africa. And once we finalize this workshop between the different ICT ministries and the different regulators to put in place the right framework for data protection, I think we will see this number going up. But for the mobile positioning method, the most important is access to the data, and then deregulation to have access to the data. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laurent, for the clarification. So, dear participants, we'll go on a 10-minute break from now. So we'll meet again in 10 minutes. We'll continue with the session on data processing methods and standards, and this will be covered by our colleague Siim Positium, who will go over the main inputs, main outputs and benefits of mobile positioning data for governments, and also we'll go over the country, the experience of Kenya when it comes to data access from MNOs to produce statistics. So let's have a break for 10 minutes and we'll meet for the remaining part of the session. Thank you very much. All right, so we are back 10 minutes after to move on with our session. In the meantime, I see that we had a question also from Tiroyaone Montate from Botswana Tourism Organization. He's a senior statistician there, and he goes back, Esperanza, to the issue of capacity and when it comes to data scientists. And I think you've covered this. You mentioned that you're developing training materials on the use of MPD for statistics, and this will be covered by the UNCBD, the regional hub in Rwanda. And the training course, once the training course is available, it will be shared with the different participants. And the areas covered are data processing and specific methods for the calculation of indicators for areas of focus. And this is a good transition actually for our next session on the data processing methods and standards, and the presentation that will be done by Siim Esko, who's the head of sales at Positium, and he will go over the main outputs and benefits of mobile positioning data for governments enabled with the data processing pipeline. So Siim, is there a solution in place that can help our African member states process mobile positioning data into statistical indicators and other specific applications? So I give you the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here and good to have so much interest after the first webinar. And I think the floor is set quite nicely by Esperanza and Laurent. I will discuss the benefits and the processing methods of mobile position data. These are quite important, and I will show you why. Because it's necessary to have these in place when you're discussing access to the data. So my name is Esko from Positium. Positium is a company that wants the world to use mobile position data for the good of society in any country of the world. So however we are able to fulfill that mission, we are happy to do so. And one of the questions that we are often asked is how to access the data. Data access is a complex topic, but data access discussions are not fully understood unless you also think about what happens after the data has been accessed. Oftentimes during data access discussions, once you have been discussing with stakeholders, as Esperanza mentioned, you have outlined all the different rules for data access, the data protection is understood and clear, as outlined by Laurent, then the question is, so once you access this data, what happens then? In Europe, as already mentioned, there is a term called GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation, and it outlines that for any successful project, there should be a data protection impact assessment. So what does that mean? So if we break it down, it means that there should be data protection measures in place. So what are the measures that allow you to access the data in a secure manner, because we don't want any privacy concerns. But then on the other side is the impact and the processing side of things. So once you access data, how is the data processed? And what is the expected end result and benefit of this data? So the impact could be seen in a way that how does it impact privacy of people? But once that has been taken care of in a technical manner, that access is secure, then the impact can be turned around and say, is the project that you're doing proportional to what the organization's goals are, what the country's goals are, and what is the benefit of this project that we should undertake this? So Positium believes that the answer is in better data for better decision making to make a difference in society, and processing tools are what we live and breathe on how to turn mobile positioning data for human mobility monitoring, analysis, and statistical indicators, and looking for different solutions to bring this to light, while always prioritizing quality, because without quality in the input, processing, and output, the end result will suffer. Positium has done projects globally, and this is where the experience for this presentation comes from as well. Especially, I will show you some examples from Estonia, Indonesia, and Oman, both how the data was accessed, but also the benefit of it. So one thing to note, to get it out of the way, is the processing of the data. It can happen either centrally or in a distributed way. So centrally located in a statistical office, in the Ministry of Tourism, in the Communication Authority, or in the cloud. This allows complete control of the processing of the data, both from the security aspect, but also from the quality aspect. Then the second option is to access the data within the mobile network operator's own premises or in a distributed way, and aggregate and merge the data centrally. And both of these options are very valid, and it could be that during the evolution of the project, depending on the readiness of all stakeholders and, for example, infrastructure readiness, this might change, going from distributed to centralized, or vice versa. But when you look at distributed processing, it should be understood that the processing in each operator should take place in the exact same manner in order to have comparable results. It sometimes happens that different operators have their own way of understanding methodology, their own way of aggregating the data, and the final result cannot be merged to a good quality result. So maintaining control of the quality is still important in both methods. So how do we do that? Is by completely automating and turning into software the different complex methods and standards needed to process this data, take the reference data and mobile network operator data, run it through the data models and turn them into the statistical indicators needed. And this Positium data mediator, as we call it, software can work in both distributed and centralized ways. So this kind of platform, if you already have that idea of how the processing will work, it will be an extra benefit when you start discussing about data access. Otherwise, the discussions might end there. How do you process data? Well, if you don't have an answer to that, and you don't have a solution to bring to bear, or at least comparable solutions, so that you can you have a way of selecting between different solutions once it goes to a project, then data access might be harder to grant because the processing methods are unclear. So in the end, the end result should be trusted statistics, and these trusted statistics can only work when you use proven methods that already are in place to produce official statistics through mobile position data. And luckily, there are materials and guidelines at the moment already in circulation. For example, the feasibility study by Eurostat, or under the auspices of Eurostat, and the handbooks mentioned by Esperanza in the previous session. So there are guiding materials out there that allow you to take the experience of different countries that have already started to produce official statistics with these data sets and apply them to your own country. So in Estonia, official statistics has been produced since 2009 until today, and in Indonesia for the last 5 years. So there's plenty of experience to share. And now maybe a bit more on the benefit side. We already saw in the last webinar on how much the Central Bank of Estonia benefited from having this data set for their official statistics production. And if you can invoke the benefits experienced by other countries in this process, this will benefit your data access discussions greatly. For example, you could say that the Central Bank of Estonia is now producing data faster than they could before, or that the sample size is much higher. The level of detail in the data is much higher compared to survey methods, for example, and there could even be monetary benefits by doing things more efficiently, especially compared to surveys, which are very cost efficient, which are very costly. And of course, this is maybe a soft point, but there's less burden on tourists if there's less surveys being done to get the data. Now, the benefits are to get much more granular data compared to surveys. If you ask a person what destination they visit when visiting the country, they will either give you some destinations, one or a few, but they will mostly be on the ground level, municipal area. With big data, you can really go into the detail of which area is being visited, how long they're staying there, and also do that on a daily basis, which is definitely not possible by surveys, and the sample size is not there with other big data sources, as discovered in the previous webinar. Also, the flows, the sequence of visitation from one area to another, what is the entry point and what is the sequence of visitation to different destinations inside the country. Also, if you're looking at major events happening in the country, and do people visiting those events also flow out from the original area of the event to other areas of the country, so that this event brings tourism not only to the event location, but actually to the country at large. So these are all benefits that you can mention, not to mention the aggregation that can be achieved through the daily, even hourly aggregation in some cases, or looking at the data in a grid way. So you aggregate the data not as municipal areas, but as adaptive grid, or a different kind of a grid level. So one way or one scenario where these kind of mobile position data projects very much work, and the efforts to convince the different stakeholders will probably bear fruit is when you have a certain process to gather the data, which is somehow interrupted. And you heard last time about the case of Estonia. The central bank had their quarterly border service cancelled during the peak of the economic crisis in Europe in 2008 and 9, and they needed a different way of producing the data. This could also be the case for areas affected and countries affected by COVID, and it's very, very difficult at this point to do domestic or even border surveys. So the cooperation model could be either you have so the data access is different in different countries, and in the case of Estonian Central Bank, the data access is actually done by the central bank itself, and the third-party processing company like Positium takes over the processing of the data, and in the end, the official statistics producer again validates and puts in place the logical checks to disseminate the data, to validate and disseminate the data on, to the proper stakeholders. So you can see that there's a lot of control of the official statistics producer in this kind of cooperation model, while also getting the benefits of having a third-party company coming in and bringing in international experience on how the calculation will happen. And this has produced the longest-running official statistics time series based on mobile position data in the world. And we're happy to say that 14 years has been reached already, and this is the result of cooperation between us and the statisticians at the Central Bank of Estonia. Another case study that I want to mention is the case study of Indonesia. And you might have heard about the case in Indonesia before. I want to point out the two aspects of this case. One is the benefit to the border areas, and the second is, again, the cooperation model that we saw worked very well for this case. So first off, the border of Indonesia is very, very long, and there are some peripheral areas where you don't have the border entry control in a way that covers the entire border, but there is still a lot of cross-border movement. You could call it community-based tourism, you could call it visiting the family and friends or shopping, but the border between Indonesia and Timor-Leste, for example, saw a lot of movement that was not covered by immigration. But when we started to look into it with mobile positioning data, there were 100,000 people or 100,000 visits per month happening across the border, and there was a lot of movement there that was not previously measured. What this how this turns into benefit for the country is that these peripheral areas are now being invested in. So they're building the border infrastructure. They're also building some tourism infrastructure, some basic infrastructure that was necessary. For example, better markets, cross-border events, and investment is actually now flowing into these very peripheral areas to the east side of Indonesia. So new data source provides a new perspective on tourism. And this is not your usual Bali going tourists, but these are visitors nonetheless, and cross-border movement definitely. The second point is the cooperation model that I want to emphasize. And what is really important is that the Statistics Office and the Ministry of Tourism, they were the ones that both specified the need for the project, specify the output and variables, and analyzed the data and disseminated it at the very end. So it's very much the role of the government to specify what is needed to be able to understand tourism in a better way, and what are the outputs needed, and then make sure that the stakeholders receive this information. And it can be the mobile operator and other parties together that design the process of how mobile position data turns into valuable statistics that are needed, and set up this data collection. And it's quite different when you look at the pilot projects until implementation, and when you look at monthly production. As you see, it's much more lightweight when the production process has already been put in place. So during the monthly production, mostly it is about maintaining the process system, making sure that it is properly updated, and running the collection of the mobile positioning data in a regular basis. And then Statistical Office and the Ministry of Tourism still holds the same benefit month after month, while not having a lot to do with the processing system or any data collection method. Usually you don't see this with surveys, where every time you do a survey, you have a very large project to go through the entire process of having the survey and collecting the data and analyzing it. So this is mostly automated at this point. And the last case I want to share with you, and maybe more from the data access perspective, is the case of Oman, where the National Center for Statistics and Information, NCSI, worked on data from 2 mobile network operators, processed it using one system, and used the government cloud. So in a very centralized manner, analyze the data coming from the different operators. So how the data flow works is data is accessed from both operators, and it goes through different phases of data cleaning and processing, and then aggregation. Then at the last step, these data are merged together to provide expanded results to the general population. And this data is being pushed, the results are pushed through the API to interactive applications that give the tourism stakeholders and stakeholders of other data sets the necessary data. So there is a distinction between the data available for the internal use of the National Center for Statistics and Information, and these are the internal results based on a grid that adapts to the level of activity. So when you zoom into to the more crowded areas, you will have the grid sizes are smaller compared to, for example, desert or natural areas. So these are the internal results, but the public sees public results based on administrative units. in different areas, for example, tourism, population, mobility in this case. So how does that leave us? So there are three levels of data protection. One is the raw and sensitive data, which is collected by the mobile operators on an individual basis. And this data is already being used by the mobile operators themselves, and in some cases in Africa also by the communication authorities. And this is very sensitive data in its raw format and should be protected as such. Then the second level is de-identified data, which is used to process in a secure location according to all data protection rules and standards. So even if the Data Protection Act is not in place, standards, international standards are there, which can be looked at, and processing is done, should be done automatically in this stage. And the results to the public are only made accessible following statistical disclosure control rules, which most organizations that provide statistics are well aware of. So you cannot show groups of less than 10 people, for example, in any area, and these are enough to provide the benefits that that you're looking for in mobile data projects. So think about the benefits, think about the processing methods, and I will leave you with this slide, which might give you some ideas on what is the return on investment seen in Oman, for example. New indicators, faster processing, applicability in a wide range of domains, not only tourism, but in different areas of tourism, event analytics, and also cost efficiency compared to other existing methods, because you're putting in place something that can be automated. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Siim, for this very comprehensive presentation, and also the concrete examples of the case studies with the Central Bank of Estonia, and also with the Statistics Office of Indonesia, and also Oman. I think this has given, I hope, some good perspective on the applicability of your solution to our member states. Dear participants, if you have some questions, keep them, share them in the chat box, or keep your questions, so when we get to the Q&A part, you can ask them directly to Siim. So now we will go into an example, like a case study, the case of Kenya, the experience of Kenya on data access from MNOs to produce statistics. And this presentation will be done by Ms. Carolyne Kakemu, who's a statistician at the Communications Authority of Kenya. So Carolyne, I give you the floor for your presentation. Thank you very much.
Hello, hi everyone. Yeah, so my name is Carolyne Kakemu. I'm an assistant manager in statistics with the Communications Authority of Kenya. And I'll be taking you through our country experience in the collection of the big data. Like Esperanza mentioned, Kenya was one of the countries that were lucky enough to be selected for the big data pilot study in 2016-2017. And we are very privileged because we learned a lot from that experience. There are a lot of issues that came up, and a lot of recommendations that have since helped us in the review of our regulations, and also in enacting some of the acts such as the Data Protection Act. So just to start off, one of the priorities that we had when we came on board in this project was to first identify our stakeholders. And in our case, our key stakeholders were the mobile network operators, the ISPs, and the National Statistical Office, although we still engaged other stakeholders in the industry. And so to bring them at speed with what was happening and what was expected in this project, we actually organized a stakeholder engagement, to be able to get a buy-in from the various stakeholders, and especially our key stakeholders who are the MNOs. A number of issues also came up during the stakeholder engagement, and one of the other key issues that we were able to address is evaluation of the key legal and technical requirements, which were very critical if this project was to be a success. And to be honest, a number of legal issues came up, as at then we didn't have a data protection agency. We didn't have a law in place in terms of data protection. So there were issues on how this information will be accessed, how it will be shared, and so forth. There were also technical issues that came up, but I'm glad because the ITU had provided two options in terms of the data processing. The first one was to either process the information ourselves, that is the ICT regulator, or have the processing done by the mobile network operators. So of course we settled for the latter because of some obvious reasons that I'm going to be highlighting. First, I forgot, I need to apologize. I was not able to have a presentation on time for this. Yesterday was a public holiday in the country, and so I got most of my official emails this morning. So you'll bear with me. I'll just take you through my talking points. Yeah, so one of the key issues that, like I mentioned, came up was the issues of the legal issues. And to sort out the legal issues, it was agreed among the key stakeholders, especially between the ITU consultant and the ICT regulators and the mobile network operators, that it was very important for us to sign NDAs, so that we could have cover in terms of access to the mobile positioning information. And just to indicate is that the ICT regulator in Kenya, when it comes to mobile positioning data, it is under the purview of the ICT regulator in Kenya. So in terms of access to the information, it was not a main challenge for the regulator. However, it was a challenge for the ITU consultant who had been brought on board. So the NDAs that were signed were three-way, meaning that it had to be signed by the mobile network operators, it had to be signed by the consultant, and ourselves in this case. Basically, the NDAs sorted most of our legal issues, apart from one, which was the issue of publication. I'll come to it later on. We had issues to do with the technical requirements. And like I mentioned, we settled to having this information processed by the operators. The reason being, first, as a regulator, we did not have the infrastructure to store this kind of data, because it's a lot of data. And secondly, we do not have the necessary set of skills to process the information. And thirdly, we also had challenges in terms of even the systems that are required to process this kind of information. But lucky enough, we have 3 MNOs in Kenya, and most of them at least had, of course, the capacity to store the information. They had the necessary set of skills. One of the challenges that we also encountered in terms of the skills is that even the MNOs have very few members of staff who have skills in the data analytics or data science. And you find most of them, they have either 1 or 2 staff who who have the competence to do this kind of work. And mostly they are engaged with the operational, with the analytics for the operational purposes. And so accommodating an additional project was quite a challenge for them, because it meant setting aside, Okay, I was attending to a message on the chat. Yes, I'm told you're not able to see me properly because, like I mentioned when we were starting, it's therefore my desk. There's a lot of reflection. So I'll try to hold my laptop so that you can see me. You can see me now?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Yeah, all right. So yes, as I mentioned, one of the challenges the MNOs that were experiencing was that they also didn't have enough staff who were equipped with the kind of skills that we needed. And based on the short timelines for this project, it means they had to actually allocate a specific staff to handle this project, which for them it was quite challenging because these are staff who are already assigned to other projects. And so balancing the two was quite a challenge. But gladly enough, we were able to get a lot of support from the 3 MNOs that we have. To mention also the timelines that were given for the projects turned out to be not very visible, considering the challenge that I've just mentioned of the expertise that was required. And so of course the project took a longer time than what was earlier anticipated. We had the issues of access. Yes, I think I've mentioned that we had, sorry. Yeah, I've just mentioned that we were able to address that that we signed. And just to mention, another issue that was very important to us and also to the success of this project was to ensure that we're on the same page with the MNOs in terms of understanding, the requirements of the project, the specifications, the algorithms that are being used, the methodologies, because a number of times we have found ourselves, getting different kinds of interpretations from different operators. And so together with the ITU consultant, we were able to visit each and every one of the 3 MNOs, to just have a sitting with them and engage them on their understanding of what is expected of the project, just to make sure that we were all on the same page when it comes to understanding the processing and the delivery. The other issue that I think I want to highlight with regard to this project is the issue of the issue of publication of the information. I think this is where we encounter. You may be aware, the Kenyan report was not published, and the reason because there are issues of how should the information be shared with the public, and what are the provisions of the law. And like I mentioned, as at that time, we did not have a data protection law. And so some of the MNOs were very reluctant to agree to having this report published. As much as the information was anonymized, they still had their reservations when it comes to the, to sharing of the report with the public. So some of the lessons that we've learned from our experience from that project is an ICT regulator. The main first challenge was the issue of course, the issues of the data protection. Gladly enough, right now we have a data protection agency that of course will take care of the issues to do with the access and sharing of any personal information or any mobile positioning information, which of course is tied to the personal information. So one of the issues as a regulator that you're trying to address is the issue of the capacity internally. So we have had a lot of trainings for our staff because we find it more viable to train the staff that we have already on big data analytics as compared to bringing new staff on board, which is of course more costly. And so the authority has really made investments in terms of capacity building for the staff and in terms of data analytics. So the other challenge that I earlier mentioned was the issues of infrastructure, having the capacity to store the information, the capacity to process the information. There are systems that we've already tried to acquire for this purpose. However, Kenya being a very litigious country, we're in court for that. But we hope things will work out and we'll be able to have this system in place so that as a regulator, we can be able to, process this information and store the information on behalf of the government. And the last item that we are actually working on is the issues of sharing and publication of such information. We are working closely with the Data Protection Agency, which is still at its very initial stages. But I believe going forward, issues of sharing that kind of information is not going to be a challenge for us anymore. So I think I wish to stop at that and welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carolyne, for sharing your experience in the case of Kenya. I think it was very, very insightful. And now, after the two presentations from Siim and Carolyne, we're inviting you, the participants, to share with us any questions or comments that you would have. So please feel free to raise your hand or share your question or comment in the chat box. So do we have any questions? Any hands raised following the two extremely interesting presentations from Siim and Carolyne? Okay, Siim wants to come in. Go ahead.
I have a question for Carolyne, if I may. I heard something interesting. You said you were in court to be able to store data at your premises. Did I understand correctly? And for the audience, nobody wants to get into court matters. So how did you handle it, and what was the situation actually?
Thank you. I'm not able to pronounce your name, to be honest. So yeah, we're still in court, and we have been for like almost 4 years now. And the issue is that there's a lot of fear and reservations from especially the consumer protection agencies. Is the government trying to snoop on on its people and such? And so yes, that's the reason why we are in court, and the case is still in court. So I might not be able to say much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps Laurent, you would like to come in here and to share your experience to Carolyne.
I missed the question. Can you come again, please?
I think the question is if it comes to legal matters and how to deal with the fact that having and storing this data might not be receptive, and court cases might ensue. So in different countries in Africa, how do you deal with this matter proactively so that it doesn't go to court from any privacy, let's say, advocacy organization, and if it does, then do you have any experience to share on that?
Yeah, I would say we have more than 20 years experience working with government in data acquisition, but we never faced an issue where we had to go to court because of the data we are collecting or the data we are processing. Why? Because the right framework needs to be in place before starting. So the regulation have to cover the project, have to cover the data acquisition. So if the right regulation is in place, I think there won't be any issue, any court issue. So all is a matter of regulation, and we believe if the right regulation is in place, there won't be any issue. We never face it over 20 years because we always make sure that before implementing the system, before putting the system at the source to collect quality data, we have the right regulation to do so. And that also covers the data protection. So if we have that in place, we believe there won't be any issue, any legal issue.
Thank you, Laurent. And I would like to second that. Not in Africa, but in different countries in the world where we have set up data processing pipelines to produce spatial statistics, they have always had solid legal grounds, and also the data protection impact assessment has been done either officially or unofficially, but there's a good balance or preparatory work that you can do in order to not get into those arguments. We have not, in the 19 years that Positium has worked on mobile position data in different countries, we believe that the key issue is finding the trust before you start the project and making sure that all the different things are in place.
Very good. Thank you, Siim, for the insight. Do we have any questions in the chat or any hands raised? Not seeing. I'm not seeing any. Well, if we don't have any more questions, if everything has been clear, I think we can proceed with the closing of this very interesting webinar. Just to remind all the participants that all the presentations that were shared today will be sent afterwards. So no worries on that front. And if there are any maybe more substantial questions that want to be sent or shared, I mean, please do not hesitate to send it to us to the emails that were shared. Sarah, you can put in the chat box again the different contacts. Let me see. Any other? All right. Well, I think the session was I mean, the second session was extremely interesting. I mean, the reach and pertinent interventions of this workshop were, built on the outcomes of the first one. And if there are some elements that I was able to retrieve or to capture is, first of all, the importance of setting up an appropriate legal framework in order to facilitate this data collection and process, analyze, data collection, analyze, and storage. I mean, as Laurent mentioned, I mean, if the correct legal framework is in place, technically there shouldn't be any issue. And as we mentioned before, for the countries that don't have a legal framework in place, if the regulator engages with the mobile network operators in drafting this regulation, obviously this will facilitate the data collection effort. So I think in terms of approach, I think this is a key example. I mean, a key example of best practice that we can pick up from this presentation. Also, the going back to the issue of infrastructure, this is also extremely important. I think Siim also highlighted this. I mean, also on the capacity to store information, and I think the different examples that he shared give, especially to the Positium data mediator, I mean, concrete solutions to go over that. And if you have any additional questions on the possibility of setting that up, please do not hesitate to send us some information. And the third issue that I capture is the one on capacity. The capacity needs to be built up in different stakeholders, not only in telecom regulators, but also when it comes to the National Statistics Institutes, data protection agencies as well. So building capacity is a must if we want to achieve proper collection and analysis of mobile positioning data. And I think this is a key takeaway from this session. So mobile positioning data is considered as one of the most promising, ICT data sources for measuring the mobility of people, including the mobility of tourists. This is what actually interests us in this case. And as we mentioned in the first session, when it comes to sub-Saharan Africa, we have, by 2025, we estimate that we'll have 650 million people who will be subscribers of mobile services. And this is equivalent to 50% of Africa's population. And a lot of people, obviously, majority of people in the African continent use mobiles to communicate, access the internet, conduct everyday banking and entertainment, actually more than in other regions. And data and statistics, I mean, have been found to be more important than ever for decision making, especially when data can be difficult to collect. So I think these examples and these best practices that were shared, these challenges and solutions can help our member states in tackling these issues. So on behalf of UNWTO, I would like to sincerely thank all the participants for taking the time to listen to our discussion and interacting through the chat, and also sincerely thank our key partners, Positium, ITU, and Global Voice Group for embarking with us on this, on this initiative, on disseminating this information, and also eventually concretely setting up partnerships at the country level with our member states. So we look forward to receiving any feedback you may have in order to respond to your needs, and we're looking also forward to continue working together towards the improvement of tourism statistics through the use of big data. So with no further ado, well, my colleague Sarah, she has put in the chat box the contact details of our speakers. As mentioned also before, all the presentations will be sent. So thank you very much again for being with us today, and have a great afternoon wherever you are. Thank you very much.